Welcome to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment. The HiT cast offers a weekly look at Hollywood from a conservative point of view. Sick of media bias infecting Hollywood headlines? Tired of stars insulting your views? HiT has your back. Now, here's your host, Christian Toto.
Welcome to episode 62 of the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment. This week we're speaking with comedian Boris Khaykin, a writer-director for the sublime YouTube channel We the Internet TV. Sick of stale Saturday Night Live skits? Well, We the Internet, that's your oasis. This week's show is sponsored by CNN. When you need progressive talking points and Twitter is just too darn slow, think CNN. Before my conversation with Boris, I wanted to talk about Hollywood hate. You know, this is a complicated subject for me. I've been covering Hollywood for more than, 18 or 19 years now. I love Hollywood. I love Hollywood entertainment. I love movies. I love TV shows. And the whole reason why I got into journalism is because I wanted to be a movie critic. That was it. I guess that wasn't a high aspiration, but it is what it is. Over the years, I became more political. The 9/11 attacks really changed me. They changed a lot of people as far as the ideology. Obviously, people who were not directly impacted by the attacks, but just the way you look at the culture, the political situation, and which side of the aisle speaks to you and your needs. And that really kind of aligned me with the GOP and made me scared to death the Democrats in many ways. Flash forward to today. I still cover Hollywood. I review films. I talk to actors and screenwriters, directors, and I enjoy the process. I want to hear about their work. I want to hear about what makes them tick. But more and more and more, what I hear is just absolute unexpurgated hate. We've been doing this for the last year and a half. You know, Donald Trump is Hitler, on and on again. When Trump got elected, Michael Shannon said it's time for the urn, referring to Trump voters. Just really nasty stuff. And it hasn't slowed down. In fact, I think it's maybe metastasized in a way. And I want to read one particular tweet from a wonderful actor, John Cusack. What he said recently, it just sort of epitomized everything that I'm hearing and seeing out of Hollywood. Here it goes. I hope everyone remembers right now, only issues that matter are defeating GOP death cult at ballots and removing a treasonous, criminally deranged, serial sexual assaulting, Nazi pimp, NRA blood whore from office before he can do more damage. Everything else is just noise. No, I don't even know how to connect with someone who thinks that way. You could hate Trump, you could disagree with the NRA, but that level of invective, that level of absolute hate, it's amazing. You know, John Cusack's career has really stumbled in recent years. And looking at what he does now, it's mostly direct-to-VOD titles. I haven't seen one in quite some time. They all look rather generic. And even though he's a good actor, it's certainly not enough to kind of make me spend $9, $10, $11 to order it up on video-on-demand services. So I'm kind of out when it comes to John Cusack as far as his product goes. But what about the rest of Hollywood? What about the upcoming Oscars? And who's going to tune in for that? And more importantly, how many people are going to tune out or even not even consider watching that show? Every day I talk to another conservative who says the same thing. Used to love movies, used to love entertainment, used to love these award shows. I'm out. Too political, too hateful, too much lecturing. This is just all part of a much bigger situation. Now, given the fact that we live in a splintered society, we're very divided when it comes to our ideology, but also we can pick and choose the different niches that appeal to us. If you're a conservative, you watch Fox News, you listen to talk radio. If you're a liberal, you check out the Stephen Colbert jokes on Late Show, and you've got a lot of content specifically designed for you, and maybe that's enough. Maybe Hollywood as it stands right now can continue to survive, if not thrive, by doing exactly what it's doing and entertaining roughly half the audience. Now, everyone's going to come out for certain projects like the Black Panther. It's making $500 million worldwide so far, and good for that. It's a very high-quality film. I have no problem with that, nor do I have any problem with the political content of the film. I think it's mostly woven into the story in an interesting way. I think it makes the entire project all the richer. But other material, other gags, other sitcoms, other late-night shows, I just think they're absolutely poisoning their brand with a lot of the country. You know, at the end of the day, if you don't go full Trump hate, I don't think you're going to chase away people. If you do, you're going to chase away a lot of people, a lot of consumers, a lot of the folks who really indirectly, or maybe even directly, pay your salaries. I mean, think about all the people who supply that entertainment, who go out and buy it, check out the streaming sites, check out things on DVD. That's where they make their money. That's where it goes from the studio into their pockets directly. I think at some point it's really going to hurt. And what happens next? Well, that's anyone's guess.
You're listening to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment.
And now here's the celebrity tweet of the week. This week's honor goes to Jeffrey Wright, a very good character actor who's now appearing, albeit briefly, in the comedy Game Night. He, of course, is talking about the NRA and the recent school shooting tragedy, and he's maybe weighing in on one of the possible solutions, which would be arming teachers. It's a very credible solution. It's being worked at in very small situations across the country, but I think it's going to be on the agenda, and certainly President Trump is in favor of it, and it's something that we should be talking about in a logical, rational way. Well, that leaves out Jeffrey Wright, because this tweet leaves me scratching my head. Here we go. I'm straining to think of one teacher in the 20-plus years of my education, including my 8th grade English teacher who went off to join the FBI, that I would want packing a concealed gun in class, or who would think this isn't the dumbest thing imaginable. Well, dumb's the operative word there. Now just a real quick question. God forbid you're in a classroom and there's a shooter on the scene. Would you like a armed teacher, or would you like no one on your side to be armed? I think that kind of says it all.
Don't touch that dial. You're listening to my daddy's podcast.
My hit tip of the week is Metalhead, but it's not a movie. It's actually part of the most recent season of Netflix's Black Mirror. Think the Twilight Zone with a kind of a postmodern edge to it, set in the near future and really kind of commenting on society in very clever ways. I saw elements of the 3rd season. I was impressed by it. I've seen most of season 4, kind of a hit or miss affair. I think that's often the case with these anthology shows where one is wonderful, one is mediocre, and one's not so good. But the one I really wanted to point your attention to is Metalhead. It's set in what appears to be a post-apocalyptic world. Think like zombies, and where there's not much left of society, people kind of scrambling around for supplies. We watch 3 different people who seem to be working in unison, looking for something. We don't quite know what. But what they do find is this robotic creature, about the size of a beagle, but this beagle's got a bite. He's nasty. Maybe I shouldn't assume it's gender, but let's just say the robot itself is pretty nasty. And the chase is on. This is the kind of film that is very, very essential and simple to the core. It's a chase movie. It's a survival tale. And, of course, there will be some bloodshed. That's for darn sure. Now, I have to say, as bleak as it also was thrilling. It's told in black and white, which is always a big kind of plus for me. I just enjoy that look, that experience. It just feels different and novel and fresh. And I think that's just part of the appeal here. But overall, what I loved about this little short story, and it goes about an hour or so, so it's almost like a light movie, is that it builds this world in these small, quick touches, yet we don't know a lot about it. Why is this robotic dog-sized creature attacking the humans? What's going on here? We're given very little, but we know just enough to kind of buy into the story and care about these characters. So for all those reasons, I highly recommend Metalhead. It's Black Mirror Season 4, available right now on Netflix.
Nobody puts baby in a corner.
This is Sporty Stories of Sheer Adventure, my friend.
What's your favorite scary movie?
You will believe that a man can fly.
That's right. We're talking about all these terrible franchises and more on The Franchise. Co-hosted by Daniel Ehrenberg and
Henry Papali, folks.
That's right. So check it out. Your boy Christian Toto from the Hollywood in Toto podcast has been on an episode about Yeah, Baby, Yeah.
Yeah.
Austin Powers, International Man of Mystery.
That's right. And if you feel lucky, punks, you should tune into our show, too.
That's right. The Franchise on iTunes.
Now let's get to my chat with Boris Khaykin. Boris is a writer-director for the very funny We the Internet TV channel. He skewers both sides of the aisle with skills and skits that are fresh and daring. It's the kind of stuff you don't really hear on the major late-night shows or even Saturday Night Live. Oh, God forbid they run some of the skits that We the Internet does. It'd be a lot better for them, but they'd rather avoid it. Boris is also a stand-up comedian and an improv performer who appears around the New York area all the time. Please follow him on Twitter at the Boris K. Here's my chat with Boris Khaykin. Boris, thanks for joining the show. And I was kind of curious how you became part of We the Internet TV and also what's been the best aspect of that partnership, because I imagine it can be pretty rewarding to put up videos where you get a lot of comments, a lot of traffic, something goes viral, but no two videos are the same. So what's been the best part of that?
I think honestly a big part of it's just been the reach, because I do a lot of stuff on my own as well, and it's so funny. Like, I'll have certain things that have a ton of production quality and I'll put a ton of work to it, and usually everything kind of eventually pays off in some way or another. But I'll have something where I'll do a ton of outreach, it'll be a big crew that has a ton of production value to it, and it kind of, relatively goes nowhere. And then I'll have something else where it's a quick, stupid video I made with some friends, and then that one ends up going viral. And so it's really nice having the fan base that We the Internet has, knowing that if we make something good, there's a reliable base to spread it around and to just have eyeballs on it,
Yeah. Do you get a better sense now, having done it for a while, that there's a secret sauce behind which ones go viral, or is it just, gosh, I never, ever know? Because I suspect it's sort of catching that lightning in a bottle is not as easy as it should be. But I think if it was, we'd all be doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of both. There's definitely some things, if it's in something that's constantly popping up in the news, unfortunately, like shootings are constantly popping up in the news. So if it's something related to that, as unideal as the content as it is for comedy, it's something that'll get bumps every time people search for it. And then there's other stuff that's just from personal stuff, if I do a video about weed or something like that, and you frame it in the right way, it can be pretty reliable that it'll get hits depending on what the screenshot is and all that kind of stuff. But then otherwise, there's always just kind of a random magic to it where it hits at the right time and it just works out.
As a comedy writer, do you try to listen to that, or is it more important to kind of follow your creative muse and if the hits come, great, but I need to kind of be the funny that I can be?
I think it's both. I mean, the other thing that's been really great with the Internet is just it's been a good learning experience. Lou, who I work under, is a super experienced guy when it comes to sketch, and I think you asked earlier actually kind of how I ended up there. And I was working for a startup for 4.5 years while doing stand-up and everything else, writing and directing videos there. And then I wrote one video for Lou that was on executive power overreach, and that ended up doing real well. And so that kind of started our relationship. But yeah, I mean, essentially a big part of it was getting to work under somebody really experienced and just constantly having to put stuff out. Every individual thing gets less precious, and that kind of gives you a certain amount of freedom too.
Yeah, I think a number of reps you do always kind of makes you better at whatever you want to be at. But one of my favorite recent sketches from We the Internet is I think it was a two-parter about sports fans who love their woke athletes. It's very funny for starters, and of course you need the funny. But also I thought, boy, that's the kind of sketch that Saturday Night Live would never do. Can you talk a little bit about that one, or were you part of that production?
Well, funny enough, actually, that's one that I was not a part of.
Okay. Well, maybe steer it toward the whole angle that why wouldn't Saturday Night Live touch that? That's funny. It's clever. It's different. It really speaks to what's going on. And I think it speaks to a lot of people right now because a lot of folks are just upset with how political sports have become. And so you think, well, yeah, of course Colbert would do that and Conan and Saturday Night Live. So why aren't they doing things like that from your perspective?
Well, I think once in a while they do surprise me. SNL will surprise me every once in a while and do something that I do still really love. It's just I guess few and far in between, and it's hard to nail down a reason why, because there's certainly a kind of monotonous point of view when it comes to most comedy that's out there right now. It's really hard, honestly, to nail down a reason why, because I have a lot of friends that work at some of the like Daily Show spinoffs and stuff like that. And a lot of people that work on those shows don't fully agree with those points of views and might privately express other points of views that differ from it, that wouldn't do it on the show, let alone do it like personally in a public forum. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting, and I'm not sure it's like a phenomenon. I wouldn't say it's like a top-down thing where they're getting some kind of orders to have a point of view from their networks. It's just a weird phenomenon, like a feedback loop. It's hard to nail down one thing, because I don't know if I can say like any particular individual is pushing it or responsible, but I think it's kind of a collective thing, I guess, where people aren't speaking up when they feel strongly enough or when they should be, and I guess they just don't want to have certain conversations. I think that the problem is also like there's just a lot of different contexts that everyone's watching it under, and I think sometimes expressing a different point on SNL, it's easier to make a joke when you're already agreed on the context, and so if you touch it in a way where not everyone's really agreed on it, it's on top of like trying to make them laugh. You have to now do this extra work of putting everyone on the same page and like opening their minds outside of whatever their assumptions are, you know?
Yeah. Oh, interesting point. You know, one of the things that you do with We the Internet is you tackle both sides. And I think there are very few comic institutions. I think South Park jumps to mind that does the same and does it well. From your perspective, or just working with the group, how do you get that balance? Is it sort of just being open to anything? Is there sort of a thinking where, hey, we did a couple of jokes or a couple of sketches that kind of lean to the right, maybe we should lean a little bit to the left next time? What's that creative process like?
I don't think we aim necessarily to say like we did it made fun of this side, now let's make fun of this side. We kind of just, pitch ideas and whatever sticks. I mean, part of it is sort of based on the ideology, and personally, I try to always put ideology second, which I think is a big part of it. The part of keeping centrist about it is always putting that centrist ideology behind actually trying to be funny, because I do think that the truth is kind of in the middle, like any extreme is not great. It's called extreme for a reason. And so, where there's truth in comedy, it's going to be somewhere in the middle. The problem is just really trying to prioritize that comedy that comes from truth, as opposed to pushing whatever your ideology is when it comes to any of these issues. So I think as long as you really push for the comedy first, it should happen naturally.
Yeah.
Odd enough, it so often doesn't. But what naturally should happen is you should find hypocrisy on the left and the right, because it exists in both. It wouldn't be the left and the right if it didn't. Everybody would just be in the middle,
Mm-hmm. Well, just my own little 2 cents there. I feel like a lot of the Funny or Die clips, especially the more political ones, end up more in the die section as far as the humor. I think they're kind of leaning in that direction more than the actual making people laugh. And you may have some chums there, so you don't have to weigh in on that, but that's been my observation. I want to talk real briefly about President Trump. Most comedy institutions have been really going after him for the last year plus, and I get it. He's outrageous. He's out of control at times. He's perfect fodder for comedians looking to do political humor. You guys aren't obsessed with Trump, though. And can you talk a little bit about sort of your approach to that? Is it a matter of not repeating what everyone else is doing, or is it something else that sort of guides your way when it comes to Trump humor?
I think that's definitely part of it. Is that, I mean, if you scroll through, jokes on Twitter, there's just going to be so many comics making the same jokes, and that's even like looking at it positively, because a lot of times it's not even like making a joke. It's literally like, did you hear what he just said? How ridiculous. And then that's kind of the punchline, essentially, which we sort of tried to address that in a meta way and did sort of a Doug Allen character that Lou played That was actually, I think, one of the first videos I directed at We the Internet, which was just like an anti-Trump comic whose entire punchlines consist of just Trump, damn, can you believe it, basically. So one way is to get a little bit meta about it, to try to, make fun of the comedy, sort of. And the other thing is that, like, he's not really good for comedy because it's hard to make comedy on top of comedy. And one thing I'll say about Trump is that, like, he's pretty funny. I don't know how much control he has over it necessarily, but, like, he's a pretty funny president. And sometimes it's like he delivers stuff that's, like, genuinely, it's not necessarily the best thing for the presidency, but sometimes I'm like, wow, that's funnier than some comedians I know that are making jokes about him. And that makes it harder. People are like, oh, it should be fodder for comedy. But it's not that easy to make comedy on top of comedy, because the whole thing is like finding the weird thing in the normal. But when there's so many things that are abnormal about this presidency, for better or worse, it actually makes it harder unless you're pandering to a bunch of people who already agree. And then, like, you can make a joke because there's a baseline that everybody agrees on, and you're like, this is the weird thing. But then if anybody disagrees with you, there's this whole disconnect between them, because now that base of agreement is no longer there.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And by the way, we're going to have the video that you just mentioned about the Trump comic on the show notes page at HollywoodInToto.com. We're talking with Boris Khaykin, director and writer for We the Internet TV. It's a really great place to check out political humor from sources and avenues and directions you don't quite expect, but you're always laughing, so check that out. Boris, we've seen some shrinkage in the online humor space. Funny or Die, Crack.com, there have been some layoffs. It certainly isn't great news, but I was kind of curious, from your perspective, working in this arena, what's been the impact? What are your thoughts on that? And, can We the Internet keep on keeping on at this point?
Well, I think the impact has definitely been significant, but it's really hard. I'm still positive about it, only in the sense that I think something will disrupt it. I don't know kind of how that'll manifest, but I mean, part of it, and I think the Facebook article that you're referring to, or it was on SplitSider, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that article had a lot of interesting points, but I think one thing I would add to that is it's sort of a reflection of the public. People are used to not paying for content, and, I'm guilty of this as well. People are used to scrolling and getting their eyes drawn to kind of lowest common denominator stuff. Like I mentioned, your like weed meme or something like that, or whatever it is that's like you're scrolling past. It's a well-produced sketch that might take a minute of your attention to really figure out. A minute is honestly too long. You want to have the joke in the first 30 seconds. But even then, like, a well-produced sketch doesn't always draw people in the same way as like something somebody filmed on their phone of like with like weed and tits in it that like draws somebody in, So part of it is a reflection of the public, and it's hard to say right now what people want, whether they really, is this the world that they want to live in, where they're fed all these like simple lowest common denominator things, and then if they want high quality stuff, they go back to whatever TV turns into over the next couple of years. So I don't know what the space will look like, but I'm hopeful that it'll get, whether it's outside of Facebook, because one of the points in that article was just that it's created this ecosystem where it's no longer like a wild, wild west internet. It's a curated internet based on Facebook's algorithms. But again, those algorithms reflect what people want. And I think one thing I'll also disagree with that I remember reading on there is just the idea that the algorithm, kind of the way that it flattens the user profile to where, it kind of gives you what you want to watch. And I think that it's not that that's not true, but I also think that, the way it justified it was like advertisers want to be able to easily predict a demographic. I don't think that that's inherent to kind of turning everybody into like a predictable simpleton, because they're not really predicting individuals. They're predicting groups of people in aggregate. Mm-hmm. So I do think that there's a solution where, and I don't know what it is, of course. If I did, I'd probably be a rich man, but I think there's a solution where you can still predict groups of people in an aggregate, but you have individuals that have their own, idiosyncrasies and preferences. You people do that. We have a society that's based on predicting how a lot of things work in the aggregate that certainly isn't mutually exclusive to individuals having their preferences and liking some weird shit here and there.
Yeah. And I think that's sort of almost every part of the media landscape is shifting and changing and growing and shrinking. So it's if anyone had some of the answers, they'd be rather wealthy, like you said. Talk about a little bit about today's humor. When you watch a Jimmy Kimmel or a Stephen Colbert, and they're sort of the people that you point to as far as late night politics driven jokes. It's getting mean. It's getting full of lectures, whereas maybe there'd be a pointed joke that would make you think and kind of perk your attention. But lately, it's just sort of like, oh, I'm watching a pundit who happens to be have a couch and a couple of Tom Hanks guest appearances on there. What's going on with comedy? I mean, it doesn't. I guess it rubs against my ideology the wrong way. But at the same time, thinking, even if I was the biggest Trump hater, I don't know if that's what I'd want in my late night humor, or maybe that is what we want. Just what's your take on it? You're in the trenches. What are you seeing, and what's your take?
Right. Well, to be honest, I don't watch a lot of the late night shows that often anymore. I don't know if that's an effect of what you just described or kind of just coincidental. But I'm not sure what the exact reason for everybody kind of sounding the same and often preferring ideology over the jokes. I think, Jimmy Fallon kind of avoided it for a little bit. I was never a giant fan, but I have friends that write there. I know they have a lot of funny stuff, but they kind of were forced into it. They were losing ratings, I think, at one point. Even though I'm not really sure how the ratings compare now in general. I'm hopeful also, if you're familiar with Michelle Wolf, she just had a HBO special that I loved. She's super funny stand-up, and she's getting a Netflix late-night show. And I'm not sure. I think somebody mentioned to me that part of their messaging is that it is going to prioritize jokes and things like that over ideology. So I don't know for sure anything about that really, but I'm hopeful with that one just because I know Michelle and she's super funny, and her HBO special, actually, that was one of my favorites in a while. She did a great job of touching political stuff and always bringing it back to the joke.
Yeah.
And you could tell, and it kind of forced her to almost be centrist. I'm positive that Michelle is a left-leaning comic, but watching the special, you don't feel like you're being lectured to in any way because she prioritizes the joke. And the joke, if that's the fact, it's just going to force at least a little bit of centrism in there because the truth is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. Well, just a quick point. I got the press release announcing her new show, which I guess is going to come out later this year. It's not ready for production. It's not ready for, being on Netflix right away. But they did mention that she's going to prioritize the funny. That was one of the key points they mentioned. So I thought that was interesting. You mentioned before about school shootings as being in the news, and maybe if there's a reference to it, it sort of draws some traffic. But on a grander scope, are there subjects? I mean, that's maybe a more extreme example, but are there subjects that you find really tough to satirize at this point? I mean, obviously, death and destruction is a no-brainer, but are there others that you would think would be kind of meaty and kind of great fodder for what you and your team does, but ends up being kind of trickier than you thought?
Certain subjects are definitely harder than others. I'm definitely of the, I guess you would call it, extreme perspective that nothing should be off limits. It's just that some things are more difficult. And it's, even if I, let's say, believe that a particular thing can and should be joked about, I need my audience to be able to laugh at it. So if they're not on the same page as me, I have to figure out a way to kind of surprise them and get underneath that. Mm-hmm. So, sometimes it's more difficult. I think that with a lot of kind of the way the culture is right now, a lot of the Me Too movement and things like that, it was difficult to make jokes because a lot of people it was emotion first, especially, on Facebook or online. And so if you make a joke, a lot of your audience is just not ready to intellectualize it or detach from it. They're very close to it because it was a cultural movement that everybody kind of personally and emotionally related to, at least the way that they posted about it. Mm-hmm. So certain things either, needed a little bit of time or just needed a particular angle to kind of surprise people, which I think we found in certain ways, and I think I found in certain ways when talking about it. But it's just more difficult. If it's a more touchy subject, it just takes a little bit more effort to find an angle that surprises people to where they laugh, against their will, for a better, no pun intended there, but to where they find, everybody finds catharsis in those things, and I don't think there's anything that's off limits. It just has to be funny enough to catch people off guard.
Yeah, that's the first and foremost comedy role. Well, one last question for you, Boris. When you think about where comedy is today, and maybe looking ahead to 2018, the rest of it in 2019, are you optimistic about where things are going? We've got lots and lots of different outlets and Netflix and streaming venues and YouTube. That's good. Then you mentioned sort of maybe the difficulty in monetizing it. That's a question mark. And then you've got PC restrictions where, we've got comedians making full-blooded apologies for just telling the wrong joke. So where do you kind of end up? Are you kind of eager to see where things go, a little bit skeptical of where things are headed? What's your take?
I think I'm more optimistic than not. Not super confidently so, because, who's to say where any of this goes. But I do think in the same way that kind of truth prevails in that sense, I think that we're really quickly moving through a lot of different cultural things. And I think that, I guess I'm just hopeful that a solution will pop up for it. I think that everyone's attention span is relatively short, so no one stays that touchy about anything particular for too long. I think the big thing is just figuring out the economy of it, because that's what's going to drive quality content, is being able to put money into it and produce it. And there's already, with like Movie Pass and things like that, people are finding ways to leverage new technologies and be the Spotify of movies. And I could see somebody being that for even sketch comedy online. I don't know what it looks like, but I've talked to some people about different platforms and things like that can address the problems in it. And I'm sure I'm not the smartest or the most at the forefront of it. So I'm definitely hopeful that there's enough minds working on it who care about it. And I think that people care about laughing. I think that especially, doing live, I perform live almost every night in New York and a lot outside of New York. And the media also doesn't really reflect the way that everybody feels. There's a lot of centralized messaging and the loudest voices that are kind of claiming to represent society. And there's a lot of society that still just wants to, work and provide for their families and have a good time when they go out without overthinking or being lectured about ideologies with comedy. So especially, getting outside of New York, there's just so many different issues and topics and comedy in particular is just, there's so much unfunny conversation about various progressive issues, and some of it is good and healthy, and then other stuff, I'll talk to friends even in New York who aren't involved in comedy, who are just working regular jobs and getting by, and they're like, I have no idea what, and this is friends that are, women and more diverse people than myself, and I'll be like, oh, do you know about this diversity or feminism thing that's being taught? And they're like, I don't know, man. I think this is funny. I don't care,
Yeah. Well, it's good to escape the sort of the media bubble. It can be kind of all-encompassing, so good to hear that there's a field report from the real world. And, well, thanks again, Boris Khaykin, for joining the HitCast. Please visit the great YouTube page for We the Internet TV. You're going to find a link to that and a clip or two at HollywoodInToto.com, the show notes page for this episode. And also visit Boris's official website, BorisKhaykin.com. That's Boris, KHAYKIN.com. Keep up the great work, Boris, and we will check in with you soon.
Awesome. Thanks very much.
Well, thanks again for listening. Don't forget to check out HollywoodInToto.com for both the show notes and, of course, the latest entertainment news. Please follow me at Twitter at HollywoodInToto. And we'd love it if you leave a podcast review over at iTunes. See you next week.